Hey there, Agile archaeologists, and I'm thinking of like the Indiana Jones kind of archaeologist, maybe not really an archaeologist. But hey there, and welcome to another episode of Agile Bytes, the podcast sponsored by Integrity Inspired Solutions, where we build software in an agile manner day in and day out. You know, we've been starting on our series on MVPs, the different pieces that go into thinking and defining an MVP. And on our last episode, we talked about the vision. And again, I want to emphasize that even though I'm doing this series as a linear series of areas, if you decide to start using these things, it's not important that they follow a specific sequence, like you get the vision done and then you move on to today's stuff. When we do these workshops and execution, there's a lot of give and take and back and forth, and we may leave an area behind for a while to go flush some other things out and then come back to it later. Like I said in the last episode, the vision is usually where I start because it's the governing kind of thing, but it's often the last thing to actually get finalized. So just kind of keep that in mind. I'm sharing with you different areas that all need to be mapped out, but they don't necessarily need to be mapped out sequentially in kind of like a waterfall style. And today we're going to be talking about personas or personae. Personae, I think, was originally the correct term, but so many people kept saying personas that now personas is also okay. So congratulations, you language barbarians. Another victory for you where common usage has actually changed our dictionaries. No, actually, I don't know that that's how it went, but personas or personae, more than one persona. Now, if you've done anything in product development, especially if you are involved in UI UX, you probably have talked about personas before. So I'm going to talk about them within the context of MVPs and what we do and don't do with them and what we need and don't need with these personas. What we're trying to do is we're going to be identifying our potential user, we are going to understand them, and then we are going to proceed to empathize with them. And I'm going to break down each of those three pieces. So the first one is the identification piece. We need to identify our potential users. Who are we building for? So when I start talking about somebody that has a new product idea and I ask them something like, who is this product for? Guess what they tell me a lot of the time? Everybody, right? Everybody could use this product. Everybody could use this quilting software or this salad shooter or whatever it is. It's for everyone. But you are actually not building your product for everybody. And if you thought about it very critically, you would discover that that was not the case pretty rapidly. Even products that have a very wide user base, if we think about like Twitter or X now, or we think about Google or Facebook, those products are not for everybody. For example, those products are not built for people who don't have internet access and can only do things offline. Those products are not built for small children, contrary to popular belief. So the products, even that have a very, very broad user base, still have some constraints around them. And your product is probably not meant to be as widespread as something like X or Google. The saying goes, if you build your product for everybody, then you build your product for nobody. So it's very important that we understand who the people are who are potentially buying and using this product. You know, Menlo Innovations is a good friend to Integrity Inspired Solutions and kind of an inspiration in a lot of ways. And they told the story once about a product that they were building for warehouse workers. And they designed this cool UI and they built some paper prototypes because that's the way they roll at Menlo Innovations. They make prototypes out of paper and cardboard and stuff so people can actually move things around with their hands, which is really cool. So they took their prototype and they took it to the actual warehouse users. Well, it turns out that the people in this particular warehouse, they were all pretty big guys and they had pretty big hands. And as they began to push the buttons, their fingers would push more than one button. You know, the UI had been designed to be pretty compact and get a lot of buttons and icons into a small space. I think, if I remember correctly, it was meant to be used on a tablet. And so people would try to use the UI and their fingers were so large that they would hit two buttons at once or so. And this is a prime example, right? Because as we're designing this UI on a screen, it may look great, but come to find out that when this design collides with our actual users, it's not a good design. It may be a great design for a completely different set of users, right? But it was not the right design for those people. So it's very important that we identify who those people are in terms of our product, because that is going to shape a lot of what we build, a lot of what that end product and the experience of our product is going to look like. So how do we go about this? Well, the first thing obviously you have to do is think about who your product is for. Are you solving a problem? Are you providing an additional benefit? Are you providing fun or a luxury? What is it that you're providing with your product? And who is going to have that problem primarily, or who is going to enjoy that, or who's going to be able to afford that? These are the kinds of things that you want to ask yourself. What I like to do is think about real people. This is ideal when you're coming up with personas, is to think about actual individuals that you or your organization knows who would be interested in a product like this. And there's a good reason for this, and we'll get into that later. But a lot of times when people think of personas, they think of fabricating them, like fictional characters. Martha Johnson is a 34-year-old mother of two, and she plays tennis and drives a Volvo. And, like they think about coming up with these characters. I highly encourage you to think about real people. And ideally, if you have done any kind of research or thinking about product and market fit at all, you've probably talked to at least one person, right, who would potentially be interested in this product. So think about them. Who are the real people who are going to want to use this? And then as I think about those people, you also kind of want to rank them in the sense of who's going to be using it the most, right? Who is this product really for? Who is it only kind of for? For example, a lot of the products that we build at Integrity are internal line of business applications. And so you have people who are going to use them on a day-to-day basis to get their jobs done, but you also have managers and department heads, who may need to do some administrative things or who may need to run reports. And then you're probably also going to have some IT folks who do things like, add new users and do different things with the software like that. So you have the people who are doing their jobs, their managers, and then you may have some IT administrators or some non-IT administrators or something like that with a lot of the software. Now, what we want to do is we've identified all these as people who are going to use the software, and we want to keep them all in mind, but not everyone is impacted as much, right? The people who are using the software to do their job, they are a very high impact user, right? They're doing this software all the time, right? So we want to put them really close to the center of our discussions and our considerations, maybe followed by managers, maybe then followed by IT administrators who are maybe closer to the outside of the value that the software is going to provide. And you want to do this because as you identify potential users, you're going to have some where this software is going to hit harder than others. It's going to mean more to them than it is to others. They're going to be using it more. It's going to have more impact, whatever it is. And you want to be able to do this because as you build the software, you want to make sure that as you make user experience decisions, that you are favoring the people who are going to be in it the most, right? And it's going to influence who you talk to the most, right? So for instance, if I'm writing software to help insurance underwriters get a quote out the door, then I'm not going to spend all my time talking to the department head, right? Because the department head is only going to use the software for certain things, right? Probably reporting and things like that. She's not going to be generating quotes very often, right? Whereas the underwriters, day in and day out, they're going to be doing research, they're going to be doing calculations, they're going to be putting these quotes together, right? So as I think about how I want this software to look and how I want it to flow and things like that, I want those underwriters to be dead center of the target, right? Whereas these others who might also be using the software, and I do want to think about them, they might be kind of out there in the periphery. And at this stage in the game, especially if we're thinking about our first MVP, we are probably going to be identifying all of our potential types of users, but just know that as we begin to flesh out the MVP, the specific MVP iteration that we put out there is probably not going to involve all of them. The first iteration we put out of insurance quote generation software probably not going to really have anything in it for IT administrators, right? Our MVP is probably not going to be adding users and roles, right? It's going to be something to get a job done in terms of the value of the software, right? Getting the insurance quotes out the door. So likely the MVP is going to mostly hit a few. So we're identifying, right? Who are the people who are going to be using our software, and then ranking them, sort of getting an idea of who is going to be hit more than others. And, as you're thinking about this, who's going to be using your software, there's several characteristics that you'll want to keep in mind. And that's what takes us to the next piece. We identify our potential users, but we also understand them. So if identifying is who are we building for, understanding is answering the question, what are they like, right? What are their characteristics insofar as those characteristics have an impact on the software? And this is important. It's at least important to our process. When we are coming up with personas, we're not coming up with all kinds of data about them. It's a balancing act, right? Because we only want to define information that's going to be valuable for us to consider as we're building the software. The trick is, though, there's a lot more that's relevant to building the software than you might think. For instance, literally right before I made this podcast, I was talking with a founder who runs a particular kind of e-commerce store, and he was talking about creating a Discord, to sort of build community, and have Discord channels where, they could give feedback on the side and have discussions about the product and that sort of thing, which all sounds great, except that most of the users of his site were much older people, okay? Not teenagers, not people in their 20s and 30s. 40s is kind of the young range for his demographic, and then it goes on up. So is Discord really going to be the tool of choice for building a community? Now, it might be. Discord is a lot more common than it used to be, right? And you see Discord communities pop up about all kinds of things. So I'm not saying not to do it. I'm just saying that that's something you have to think about, right? When you think about who your users actually are, then it begins to shape some of these decisions, right? And you might think, hey, I have generally an older user base. Maybe Discord isn't the right choice. Maybe there are other kinds of things that might be the right choice. So I'm definitely looking forward to, seeing that Facebook group pop up. That's what old people use now, right? I mean, that's what I use. So anyway, so you think about what are their characteristics that are going to have an impact on their software, and their age, or maybe even better, their generation is going to impact that, right? If most of your users are going to be teenagers, young adults, that's going to influence decisions differently about UI and UX and flow than if your users are all like retirees, for example. How tech savvy are your users? Do they use apps all the time? Do they have trouble sending email? These things are going to factor into it. Are your users more analytical? Are they more artistic? How close are they to the business that you're designing for? Or how much expertise do they have in the business or activity that you're designing for? Are they beginners just getting into it? Are they experts who have been doing this for years and years and years and years? What are the things about them that sort of define them? So as we begin to create these personas, then we begin to assemble these characteristics: gender, age, maybe even hobbies, if those are pertinent, just who are these characters? So that's the tricky part, right? And this is where there's no textbook answer, because there's a lot of areas that might influence how we build the software that are broader than we might think of. But at the same time, we don't need to be writing out like Dungeons and Dragons backstories for all these people, right? We only need to capture the information that's going to be useful to us as we discuss putting the software together. So those are some of the kinds of characteristics. And then one of the things that we do after we've sort of defined characteristics is we create something called an empathy map. And an empathy map is really just 4 quadrants. In fact, if you see me do this workshop, you'll even see on our sheets, I will start listing the characteristics, maybe even draw a little portrait. And then under that, I'll draw a big X to get my 4 quadrants. And those 4 quadrants are, what does this persona do? What do they say? What do they feel? And what do they think? And we just start listing out characteristics in those categories. So I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But that's what we're trying to capture with a persona. Again, if you have real people as your personas, then this is a breeze, because you just get them on the phone or get them in a room, or you just start listing characteristics about them. If you don't have actual individuals that you are thinking of and can write these characteristics based off of, then you're going to be doing something called an aggregate or a composition, where you are taking the general characteristics that characterize the people you have in your head, and you are creating a fictional character that represents them, right? So for instance, when we were going through the MVP workshop for Vegan Beacon a few years ago, we did not have a lot of specific individuals. So we created composites. We created fictional characters who represented the different groups. One person was real, and that was the mother of the software developer who was building it. So that was helpful, but everyone else was a composite. Coming up with a composite can be difficult, but thankfully with the rise of AI, we now have tools that can kind of help us out. I encourage you to use those for a starting point, at least. You're going to need to fine tune it with your own knowledge, but ChatGPT and other tools like that can help you. You can say, like, create me a composite persona based on these kinds of characteristics or these kinds of trends or whatever, and it will do that for you. And that's a pretty good starting point. So now we've identified our potential users. We've got a good list of kind of what they're like, what makes them tick, how they think, what they're all about. So then that brings us to the last piece, which is empathizing. How can we see our product through their eyes? How can we, as we're building the product, bring their experience into our experience? How can we see what they see, think what they think, and feel what they feel? It's not enough just to know facts about them. We have to bring their eyes and ears and hearts to our product as we build it. This is very important because remember, you are not building the software for software developers. Well, maybe you're building software for software developers, unless software developers are the audience for your product, in which case then it would be very appropriate. But here's the thing. Software developers tend to design and build software the way a software developer would use it if they were doing that job. You know, have you ever wondered why most web applications look similar? Right? It's because developers are designing them based on, well, this is how I would think about this, right? And software developers are used to things like database tables and folders and subfolders and things like that. And so a lot of the metaphors and flow follow those same things. You know, I want to do a master detail search and come up with a table of results, and then click an icon on the right side to perform actions on that search result. And I want tabs, and I want, this is how software developers think about applications. This is what their world looks like. And a lot of times, left unchecked, software developers will take that same way of thinking. And even if they don't use the same graphical metaphors, at least the same workflow. They'll do the workflow in the way that makes the most sense to software developers. But that may not be the way the people who actually do the job or perform the task or play the game or whatever it is you're building, that might not be the way that's most intuitive for them to flow through that task, or the most intuitive graphical presentation or navigation or metaphors for them. So we have to see through their eyes and think with their thoughts, because we're designing it for them and not for ourselves. We are probably not the target user. Again, if we are, that's a different thing, but usually we're designing it for someone else. And what we need to think about is, what are the things they need to do and what will make them awesome at that thing, given who they are, given the things that they think and the things that they run into and the way they normally attack this task. What's going to make them awesome at the things they need to do, not how do I think about this or what makes sense to me. You're going to be planning with them, which is really useful, again, if they're real people, getting feedback from them if they're real people, and doing prototypes and things like that, just like Menlo was doing. Remember, Menlo's big breakthrough on that product was getting prototypes in the hands of actual users, and it changed the UI very significantly and for the better. Okay, so we want to find people who are in these groups and start talking to them. And if you came up with composites, then you need to be thinking as soon as possible how you can find people, put together your team of beta users or whatever, your focus groups or whatever, who kind of look like these composites, so you can start getting feedback from them. Because having them speak directly into what you're building is going to be far more effective than trying to hypothesize it, right? Trying to think what we think they need or how they want to do their job. But before I close, I want to put an asterisk on what I just said, because in Agile product development, we are so big on users and user feedback taking us toward what the right thing is. But I do want to put a little asterisk on it, because understand that users are individuals and they may not speak for the rest of our user base. And also, any given user may have a very particular way that they think about the problem space that might not be the best one, right? There's an apocryphal quote ascribed to Henry Ford. I don't know that he actually said this, but he said something like, if I had listened to my customers, then I would have just built a faster horse. And of course, the thing is he innovated the automobile, right? Or he didn't innovate that. You know what I mean? Right? He makes the automobile. And as innovators and developers, we need to be able to do that too. We do need to be able to challenge our users, to push back, because we might not get innovation from them, but we still want their collaboration. We don't want to come up with our great new idea and see if anybody likes it, right? They will be able to tell us, but I do want to throw that out there, especially as you're working with focus groups, beta users, and things like that, especially if you are replacing an existing system or an existing business process, because a lot of times their mind is going to go straight down how to take what they're doing today and put it into software. But it may be that the business process itself, with the benefit of technology, could be blown wide open. It could be done in different and more efficient ways. So don't be afraid to push back a little bit on your personas. Don't be afraid to argue with them a little bit or to bring some fresh ideas to the table, even going all the way down to challenging the process itself. Again, I wouldn't recommend building what you think should be done in spite of user feedback, but definitely don't limit yourself to that feedback that we get. So I hope this helps. When you're coming up with your own MVP, before you start to build it, you really want to have this list. Who are your users? Where do they kind of fit in the hierarchy of how close they are to the heart of your software? What are their characteristics that you're going to need to keep in mind as you build this software? And how can you most effectively see through their eyes, think with their thoughts, and feel with their emotions as you are building this software to serve them? Thanks everyone for listening to Agile Bites. Agile does sometimes bite, but we don't think it always has to. If you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you happen to be using. And if you can, leave us a comment, because we'd love to hear your feedback. What things would you like to hear about? What things did you hear that were valuable to you today? You can also head over to integrityinspired.com to sign up to our email list. But that's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.